So, students, this picture shows certain things which will be helpful to prevent you all from COVID 19. If you follow these, you will definitely not going to be affected by this pandemic at all. First of all, maintaining social distance, that is, greeting without physical contact, maintaining a distance of 6 feet, that is, do gaj ki duri, maintaining 6 feet physical distance. Third is wearing face cover or mask which covers your nose and mouth both. These three are the most important things you can do, and you have to. I think you must do these things to avoid and to prevent you, your family, your near and dear ones, your surroundings from COVID 19. We have seen that it has been returning, it has returned back. And we cannot take any risk. We cannot take any risk and place others' life also at risk. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth without washing your hands. It was a miracle. They had long given him up for dead. Prashant saw his maternal grandmother. She appeared to be very weak. She rushed to him with her arms open and her eyes full of tears. She was really glad to see Prashant alive because they had also thought that Prashant would not have survived the storm, and it was like a miracle for the whole family that Prashant was alive. Quickly, word spread, and his extended family gathered around him and hugged him, tight in relief. Prashant anxiously scanned the motley. It means of different kinds. Motley means of different kinds. Battered group. His brother and sister, his uncles and aunts, they all seemed to be there. As Prashant's whole family, his extended family, found that Prashant is alive, they gathered around him and hugged him in relief. Prashant saw that everyone was worried. He scanned of different groups of the people. He saw his brother, his sister, his uncles, aunts. They all were there. They all seemed to be there. He met his siblings, uncles, aunts, and he was really glad to see them. By the next morning, as he took in the desperate situation in the shelter, he decided to get a grip over himself. He sensed a deathly grief settling upon the 2,500 strong crowd in the shelter. 86 lives were lost in the village. All the 96 houses had been washed away. It was their fourth day at the shelter. So, the next morning, when Prashant actually stood there and read the whole situation, he realized that now this is the time to get over his emotions and take charge of the horrible situation there in the shelter. The huge crowd of people, there were 2,500 people, 86 lives were already lost, 96 houses had been washed away, and it was their fourth day at the shelter. They did not had a single piece of grain. They were surviving on green coconuts, and there were only few left now. Prashant, being a 19-year-old, decided to step in as the leader of this village to take charge of the situation. He decided that now he along with others, were going to make this situation better for the people living in the shelter, because he couldn't see it, the the difficult times they all were facing, the conditions they were living in. They all were so hungry, and nobody's kind of helping them at that time. So it was very difficult for them. Now, what Prashant did is he first organized a group of youths and elders to jointly pressurize the merchant once again to part with his rice. What he did is he organized a group of youth elders to jointly pressurize the merchant again to part with his rice. They had been at the shelter for last 4 days. They had been eating coconuts, but now these were insufficient for the larger number of people, as there were 2,500 people. Now, Prashant, what he did is he formed a group of villagers, including the elders and the youth. They planned to force the local merchant to give the stock of grains and rice to feed the people. Finally, the group succeeded. They returned triumphantly. They were very happy because they were succeeded in getting the stock of grains from the rich merchant. Wading through the receding waters with food for the entire shelter. No one cared that the rice was already rotting. Branches from fallen trees were gathered to light a reluctant and slow fire on which to cook the rice. Now, finally, they were happy. They did not bother whether the rice was rotten or not. They just arranged stock of stack of these broken twigs and fallen trees and prepare a fire for the rice to be cooked. And for the first time, they were eating some grain. The survivors at the cyclone shelter were able to fill their bellies. They were able to fill their bellies in previously they were just kind of sharing these coconuts. They were managing, were sharing the small quantity of coconuts with each other. And now this time, finally, at the fourth day, they finally were able to fill their tummies. Now, his second task was to organize a team of youth volunteers to clean the shelter of filth, urine, vomit, and floating carcasses. Carcasses, what is the meaning of carcasses? Carcasses means the dead body of animals. Okay. Now, as you can see, as you can imagine, that 2,500 people were living under the same shelter, how the condition would have been. Some were wounded, some were not well, some were having fever. So, there were a lot of dirt accumulated in the shelter, vomit, filth, urine, and floating carcasses nearby. So, as for a healthy surrounding, Prashant decided that why not to organize a group to clean this filth and also to take care of the people who are wounded and fractured, have got fractures in this uh, cyclone. Now, first, he organized a group of youth to organize food. He succeeded. Second, he his next task was to clean the shelter. He succeeded. Now the third thing was to arrange some more food, because for few days they were able to feed. They managed to feed on the grains that they had got it from the rich merchant, but now the food quantity was not so more that they could survive for more and more days. So the third thing, he wanted to get some food passes from the military helicopters. So now, how they are going to give this sign to the military helicopters? he gathered a youth task force. Now, his next task was to organize a team of youth volunteers to clean the shelter of filth, urine, vomit, floating carcasses. Now, second task done, third one. This was the third thing is he told the youth to collect the utensils from the shelter, lie down in the sand, put the utensil on your stomach so that it gives a sign to the military helicopters that they are hungry. Finally, they were able to communicate to the passing helicopters that they were hungry. The message went through, and after that, the helicopter made regular rounds of the shelter, airdropping food and other basic needs. Prashant, who was very young at the age of 19, he decided to lead the crowd of distraught villagers. And the third thing he did is to communicate to the military helicopters and get the food parcels and other basic needs from them. And finally, he succeeded. Now, fourth, Prashant found that a large number of children had been orphaned. He brought them together and put a polythene sheet shelter for them. Prashant realized that the children there in the shelter were without parents and they were not really happy. So he brought a number of children together who were orphaned. He brought them together, put a polythene shelter, and women were mobilized to look after them, while the men secured food and materials for the shelter. Now, the task given to both women and men, women will look after the children, and men will secure food and other materials for the shelter. As the weeks passed, Prashant was quick to recognize that the women and children were sinking deeper and deeper in their grief. The sadness of the children and the women in the shelter was growing with each passing day. So, what Prashant did is he persuaded the women to start working in the NGO for food for work program. For the children, he organized sports events. As Prashant couldn't see the sadness of the children and the women growing, he requested the ladies, the women there in the shelter, to work in the NGO called Food for Work. And in order to keep the children busy, in order to keep the children happy, he organized sports events for them. Prashant himself loved to play cricket, so he started organizing cricket matches for children. He also took help from other volunteers as well to help the widows and orphans to return to normal lives because he wanted to pick up all the broken pieces of their lives and build them together. He wanted them all to be happy. Being just a 19-year-old young boy, he had all the leadership qualities and he took over this matter, he took over the situation and decided to bring everyone back to life. Now, this was the fifth one. The next now, Prashant heard about the initial government plan was to set up institutions for the orphans and widows. However, this step was successfully resisted as it was felt in such institutions children would grow without love and widows would feel stigma and loneliness. When the initial government plan came under the notice of everyone, it was found that an institution will be set up for the orphans and widows. There they're going to learn number of things, the skilled works, but this step of the government was resisted by the people because they found that they're in the institutions where the actual need right now is love, the bond. They are not going to get this in the institution. Therefore, they resisted this plan and they were successful. Children would grow without love, and women would suffer from stigma and loneliness. Hence, this plan was resisted and they all were successful. Prashant's group believed something else. They believed that orphans should be resettled in their own community itself, possibly in new foster families made up of childless, widows, and children without adult care. Now, they believed that all the orphans and the women should be resettled in their own community so that the orphans get the love of a mother and mother get the love from their children. They all will live in a community, will build a feeling of love, bond of love, harmony among each other, and which will definitely going to foster families made up of childless widows and children without adult care. It is 6 months after the devastation of the super cyclone. This time, Prashant's wounded spirit has healed simply because he had no time to bother about his own pain. Now it was almost 6 months of the disaster. Prashant has come out of the grief of losing his mother because he was engrossed in helping others that he forgot his pain. He forgot his own pain because he had let himself go so deep in helping others that he forgot his pain, that he has lost his mother. His handsome, youthful face is what the widows and orphan children of his village seek out most in their darkest hour of grief. All the widows and orphans looked up to him in their time of grief, and so he learned to come out of his gloom and smile. He was a very positive person. He was always cheerful, he had a bright face, and he was the ray of hope in the shelter. Anybody had any problem, they would seek help from Prashant, and they wouldn't go without any answer. They would always get help from him, and he was the source of happiness for them. He was the light of hope for them. And most of the villagers and orphans, children would look out for Prashant in their darkest hour of grief. This is glossary. Other than these glossary, there are other words also in this lesson where you're required to underline and write down the meanings and understand. Next, you have certain questions from this lesson. We'll be discussing these question answers, but I'm going to give you some extra questions for your assignment. All right. Let's read out the first question. What havoc has the super cyclone wreaked in the life of the people of Orissa? The super cyclone led to the mass destruction. Many people have lost their lives, their homes, children lost their parents, women became widows, and they were all homeless. All the people were left with nothing. Yes, so this is the answer to this question. Let's move to the second one. How has Prashant, a teenager, been able to help the people of his village? Prashant helped the people in many ways, like I've marked with 5 points, but there are many. First of all, he volunteered to be the leader. He formed a group of youth and got rice for the people. He arranged food for the people. Then, the second task, he decided to organize a group of youth and so that they can clean the filth, dirt of the shelter and also help the injured and the wounded. Third, he wanted some more food parcels, more basic necessities for the people there. So he um, sent messages to the passing helicopters demanding food and other necessities by placing children, keeping utensils on their stomach, and passing message to the helicopters, and they finally succeeded. Next, arranged Prashant arranged a polythene sheet for the children and told the women to look after them. And all other men were told to organize food and other basic needs for the children. Next, Prashant guided the widows to work in the food for NGO. He organized sports events for the children, for the orphan children. And at last, Prashant, including other volunteers, set up foster families for them. He brought up together the orphans who were without parents and widows without children all together to bring up new families. So these are all the things that Prashant, a teenager, been able to help the people of his village. Next question is this: how have the people of the community helped one another? This happened only under the leadership of Prashant. The people of all the shelter came together. They decided to help each other. They went to the local merchant, got a stock of rice. They cooked the rice on a burnt fire with the branches from the trees and ate a meal for after 4 days. They did every single task, every single thing all together. Prashant was the mind, was the actual mind, and others helped him to bring up, to implement all the ideas that he had in his mind. They all signaled to the military helicopters for food and help. The widowed women looked after the orphan children. The men arranged food for other necessities. All these things would have not been possible without this community feeling, without this cooperating feeling among people of the shelter. They all helped him. Next, what role do the women of Kalikuda play during these days? Women played a major role, played a huge role in this cyclone situation. They looked after the children, they helped the children to come out of the grief. They participated in the NGO program by the NGO Food for Work. And next question: why do Prashant and other volunteers resist the plan to set up institutions for orphans and widows? Why they did not like this initial plan of the government? Because they felt that isolation would increase their grief, that if they are going to be placed in these institutions, they're not going to get the love. Widows will suffer from loneliness, stigma. So, in order to not to feel them isolated, he wanted, and he, along with his other volunteers, resisted this plan and they succeeded. What alternatives do they consider? They wanted to settle them in foster families of their own community. They They, that means Prashant and other volunteers, wanted the children without parents, widows sorry, yes, widows without husbands, and especially the women without children to grow together, to come together and bring up new family, foster families, we say. They would love each other, they would support each other in this difficult time. And this is how they are going to come out, and this is how they are going to build up. Next question. Do you think that Prashant is a good leader? Yes, of course, we think he's a good leader. Do you think young people can get together to help people during natural calamities? Of course, after reading the lesson, in fact, yes, we feel that these young people can get together to help people during natural calamities. As Prashant, despite losing his mother, he overcame his grief, took charge of the situation. All the volunteers, the youth task, the people there, the young people, they all together came to help Prashant, to help each other during this calamity. They used their strength to the best of their possibilities. They used their energy, capabilities, capacities to help each other in times of need, and they succeeded in doing it. So, these are certain answers to these questions. I'm going to give you some extra questions in your assignment. I hope you have understood the lesson. The basic message of this lesson is how difficult situation comes and how we can help to to how we can help these people to come out of this difficult situation, how we as youngsters can boost up energy and confidence in the people, how we can be the positive energy to the people around, just like Prashant did. Being just 19-year old, he volunteered himself to be the leader and helped others without thinking about his own grief. He wanted to work for the happiness. He wanted to bring up this children and widows and everyone all together, and he finally succeeded. So difficult situations will come, but how we come out of it and how we help others to come out of it, that matters. So we learn a lot of things from this character Prashant in this lesson, and I hope that most of you, I think all of you, will going to adapt these qualities in you and will help others